Greetings, friends. Wandering Risky here, and this is the weekly Russian Ukrainian War update for the week of February 14th through 18th of 2024. Let me just double check that. 12th through 18th of 2024. Apologies. And this week we have a bunch of updates. Big update. You might notice a big change from last week. The Battle of Avdiivka is over. It fell a lot faster than I expected. I mean, if you told me a month ago in January 18, I would have said Avdiivka would have fell in May. I was actually making a bit of a joke saying that, I'm thinking Avdiivka might fall on, May 20th because the Battle of Mariupol ended on May 20th, 2022. The Battle of Bakhmut ended on May 20th, 2023. And I was like, hey, the Battle of Avdiivka will be over by May 20, 2024, just as a joke. Because, I follow this war daily, and I know how progress works. People sometimes get overreactive of small gains and think it's going to mean the entire front line is going to collapse. But so I'm like, yeah, it's just going to take a little while for the Russians to take Avdiivka. Might take until May, but surprisingly not. The Battle of Avdiivka is over. And let me this week. So I'm going to talk about how that happened. Basically, how did the Russians were able to take this entire town in the last week when the week before they only had maybe 25% of the city under their control. How's that possible? So now, just because the Battle of Avdiivka is over, doesn't mean the operation in this sector, the front, is over. Where I think the Russians will keep pushing, and I'll explain my reasoning first at the end of this discussion here. But first, let me talk about how they managed to capture Avdiivka. What did the Russians do? So first, let's talk about, as we mentioned last week, the Russians were expanding in the northern sector right here, and last week. When we last left off, they were battling for the motor depot, I believe it's right here, and they were basically trying to reach what they called the Road of Life, the industrial avenue here, this road right here, because reaching this avenue connected to the northern defense of Avdiivka in the coke plant to the southern defenses of Avdiivka in this area, in the 9th district and such. And so at the beginning of last week, basically on Monday or Tuesday, they managed to reach the industrial road, and not only that, they actually expanded out of it. And now they're basically, once they reached this area, they took this restaurant right here, and basically and this gas station right here. And so once they reached this area, they physically cut the Avdiivka garrison in half, meaning that the main supply route that supplied Ukrainian defenses in this area of Avdiivka were cut off. Now, that doesn't mean they were completely cut off. As you can see, they were still, for example, they had a road here, for example. But, that was the main road, and coordination between these two defenses got cut. And not only that, not only did they physically cut the Road of Life to the Ukrainians, the Russians were pushing in all directions. They were pushing to the south here. They started battling in the city park right here. They started battling for the train station right here and the city administration building. And so, the Ukrainians were hoping to use kind of the center part of the city as kind of along with the 9th district, as kind of a place to kind of fall back to, so that they're closer to the escape routes as the Ukrainians fell back. So they were hoping to at least hold on to parts of Avdiivka as the cauldron closed and have an orderly withdrawal. And because of that, they sent in during this week, they sent in the Azov 3rd Assault Brigade here to hold open this line. They did some counterattacks to try to keep open this line. However, they came a little bit too late. The Russians were broken through in the north, and basically all the Azov unit couldn't stop the Russians from rapidly closing in the pincers. To make matters worse, one of the linchpins of the southern defenses of Ukraine in this area, in the former air defense base and the Chubarashka defense place right here in this kind of I think this is a roundabout type shit. What the fuck is this? Some sort of roundabout type thing. Anyway, the Ukrainians had a strong defensive line in the air defense base, Chubarashka, and this small dacha right here. And basically, the Russians were expanding out from Opitna and because of the Russian gains about a month ago in this area, they actually almost physically encircled this Ukrainian defensive here. And this was preventing the Russians from advancing toward and linking up with the Russians who broke through in the northern part of Avdiivka right here. And so, basically, there was a chaotic withdrawal. There was a Ukrainian who escaped here who said, "Yeah, like we were like leaving in groups of 10, and like only would like 3 would return back alive." So most of the a lot of the since there was only like a small corridor because this line got cut off, like they had to escape through the fields here towards the Ninth District, and so the Russians managed to encircle this area right here, and basically like the Ukrainians were forced to get out. And so since this was the southern linchpin, the last linchpin of the southern defense of Divka, and once this fell, this basically allowed the Russians to continuously be able to meet up with the Ukrainian grouping or with the Russian grouping that's advancing to the north. And so at that point, the Ukrainians basically had like this one road left, which was under complete Russian fire control. And thus, since Azov was not able to hold open the flanks for an extended period, and since everyone was starting to retreat hastily because it's like, yeah, fuck this, we're leaving, Syrskyi, the new commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian army, announced a withdrawal from Avdiivka. So the Russians cut the defense in half. They actually even managed to enter the first parts of the coke plant. They started expanding out towards the village of Leshdonovsky here, and the southern defense in the air defense in Chubarashka got taken. And so, with the cauldron rapidly closing, with Azov basically failing to prevent the flanks from collapsing, and since the Ukrainians were in the filtration station, in the sand quarry right here, they were like, okay, we're all going to fall back here. So basically, like 2 days ago, the withdrawal has been happening, I think, for a while, but they just announced it. They were hoping to keep it up for a little bit longer, but which led, since this was such a hasty retreat, we're now seeing a bunch of POW videos. Now, it's not thousands of POWs, but there's a few hundred. Not on camera, but a lot of people are saying there was a few hundred Ukrainians that were left behind in Avdiivka. Now, one thing I was expecting, like, okay, like Ukrainian positions in this outer ring would have fell immediately, but I thought like maybe they would have held up in the high-rise district, for example, or maybe in the coke plant. However, yesterday or maybe 2 days ago, they after they announced the retreat, basically they just said, no, we're not going to hold up in the high-rise district. We're just going to retreat back to a new defensive line. And so basically, like a day or two ago, they took the coke plant and the Russians took the high-rise district, which was complete. Like I thought, like maybe they take most of Avdiivka, but the Ukrainians would hold on to like the coke plant or the high-rise district. I'm still kind of unsure why they would give up. Like I understand maybe the high-rise district is, even though you're more safer, you could retreat, it's better defensive, you could still kind of withdraw easier. It's not like, I could see the Russians still cutting you off in this area. So I understand if they left, why they would leave this, even though this was a really strong fortified area. But is like, why would they leave the coke plant? The coke plant was a really good defensive node. And now that the Russians captured it, this gives them really good positions to attack Ukrainians in their new defensive line. So the battle of, and now we see Russian flags everywhere. We see, there was Russians putting up a flag in the city park, in the school, in the railroad, somewhere in the sand quarry area right here. There was a Russian flag in like the eastern part of the coke plant, like right here somewhere. There was a flag in the southern part of the high-rise district right here. So, it was a very after they realized that after the Russians broke through into the north, they basically had to withdraw. So, so the Ukrainians got most of their troops out. However, they were under fire. A lot of them, a couple hundred, got left behind, according to the Ukrainians. And so there's a lot to say about while this was a big morale blow. It was, again, the capture of Avdiivka does not mean like, oh, now it's just a fair game all the way to the Dnieper River, for example. The Russians still have. Well, this is still a war of attrition. This is still a war of small gains. However, just to make how do you say it? But this is a big victory. The Russians, captured this town after falling. Now, What do I mean that this operation in this sector is not over yet? The Russians aren't just going to take up Avdiivka and stop. Now, it'd be kind of dumb. I mean, it's not out of the question. However, it would be kind of dumb if they did. The reason why I say that is because like they still have the whole purpose of taking Avdiivka, the whole purpose of this operation was to push the Ukrainians away from Donetsk, specifically Ukrainian artillery. And Ukrainian regular artillery has a range of about 20 kilometers. And so, in the contact line, the Ukrainian artillery would be like right here, and they'd be able to shell Donetsk very easily. However, as I mentioned in previous videos, the purpose of this, if the Russians want to push the Ukrainians to the Volchachka River, right here, because then, this would be the new front line. The Ukrainian artillery obviously won't be directly on the zero line, as they call it. It would be a bit further back. And so, the Ukrainian artillery would be here. However, since the Ukrainian artillery would be here, they won't be able to shell Donetsk anymore. They might be able to shell the forward suburbs of Donetsk, but these are like, they might be able to shell Marinka, Krasnogorivka, Avdiivka maybe, but they won't be able to shell Donetsk itself. So, that's the whole purpose of this operation. So what's happening? So right now Russian troops are expanding, and right now there's clashes in the village of Leshtochny here. In fact, there's some sources that are saying the Ukrainians are falling back from this because it's like under the cover of this coke plant, it's basically impossible to hold on to this village. They need to withdraw to more reliable positions that have some natural barriers. We don't have confirmation, 100% confirmation yet, but I'm expecting this village to fall. And right now the Ukrainians are basically building a new line along the Berdichi, Simnivka, Orlivka, Toninka defense line. So I expect the Russians to continue their offensive to take this. And what are the Russian main goals? Let me go to my Twitter thread that I made here. Right here. This is what the goal for the Russians will be. So this is the new Ukrainian defense line in black, and here is the what the goals of the Russians are. As you can see, it basically runs along the Volchachka River. You can actually see that right here with this red line is where the Russians want to be. It pushes the Ukrainians back to this black line, which is good for the Ukrainians because then they are in a better position to defend themselves along this Volchachka River. However, the Russians don't necessarily need to continue expanding out this way. In terms of the operational goal of pushing Ukrainian artillery from Donetsk, this is all they needed to do, which is to reach this red line. So obviously, they're going to expand from Lashchysky, and once this village falls, and they start expanding towards Orlivka, which I think the Ukrainians will give battle to, but it'll be a big fight. However, if they keep expanding this way, then Ukrainian forces in Servina and maybe even Tonika will be, under attack, not just from the south here, which is defendable, but from the north here, which the Ukrainians weren't expecting. So, it's very, how do you say it? It's a very big crisis because then if Serena and Tonika falls after they expand north here through Lashchysky, then they could attack Orlivka directly from the east and then from the south. And once this falls, they could just keep expanding upwards and just completely swallow this entire area. And so I expect this to maybe take another month, maybe. Maybe it collapses faster than that. It was a big surprise that Avdiivka fell as fast as it did. So we'll see if the Ukrainians could hold this new defense line. We'll see if the Russians just take Avdiivka and then put a pause. But a lot of sources are saying they don't want to pause because they know that, if they pause, the Ukrainians will just build a new strong defense line here. And while taking Avdiivka is a good blow to the Ukrainians will still be able to have artillery here and still be able to shell Donetsk. So their goal here is not over yet. They still need to reach this red line here. And that means also taking Peremyska, which another part is the Russians are still advancing, very slowly up this alley, this one street towards the center of Peremyska right here. So that's happening. So the Russians are slowly making their way up Peremyska. They're also clashing into Volska, not in it, but they're starting to attack Ukrainian formations here. So as you can see, the whole purpose of that's what's happening in Avdiivka, where the Russian, how they I talked about how they captured the town. I'm talking about why this is not over just yet. The Russians are going to continue expanding. There's clashes in Lashtinsky, which could lead to the battles for Orlovka, and then they might cut off the Ukrainians in Severodonetsk. And so basically, they're going to be getting to this kind of red line, and once they secure themselves here, this will achieve this operational goal of pushing the Ukrainians away from Donetsk. However, while this is where they mainly shell Donetsk from, this is not the only area they have to take. As you can see, the Ukrainians still have positions in this area. This is the pre-war front line in Krasnogorivka and Novolska, and so the Ukrainians could have artillery here, and they could still shell Donetsk. And so I actually proposed. So this is one of the tough nuts Russia has to crack, and as we go to the South Donetsk front, as we discussed that, I'm talking about what do I envision? I think the Russians will continue their advance towards Kharkova, which is one of the major Donbass cities. However, to do that, they need to pass Grigorivka in this massive name that I can't pronounce. However, as they advance along this reservoir and to take Grigorivka, which is what they're clashing for right now, they're going to advance to this reservoir. And once the Russians reach this reservoir and take Grigorivka, they'll be in positions to start shelling this main road that leads to Krasnogorivka and capture it. And not only will they capture it, then they can continue their operations to reach this road right here, and then they have a final road in these areas right here. So they could completely start encircling Krasnogorivka from the back, and then once they reach this reservoir right here, there'll be like one road left, and Krasnogorivka will fall. They'll be forced to withdraw. And then once Krasnogorivka falls, and the Russians manage to reach this red line, as I mentioned before, which means they'll be the forward Russian positions would be in the village of Netolov here, maybe like along this area right here. The Russians will basically then, I think, try to push from, because this is the hardest part right here. These are just fields. And as you know, in this war, it's very hard to fight in open fields because of FPV drones and such like that. So, I could see how Krasnogorivka falls, but the Russians will have to advance through open fields and make some, new defense line, maybe around this, kind of tree line right here and along these tree lines, and meet up here and take out Novolska. Because then if they advance, I think I have it here. Yeah, right here. Then the Ukrainians will have very small they'll be forced to withdraw from the forward positions and back towards the Vochachka River here. And basically they'll have these fields as kind of mining fields so that the Russians can't just attack them directly. It'll be a suicide mission. So the Ukrainian main position will be back here, and thus artillery will be back here. And then that's how the Russians will finish their main operational goal of pushing the Ukrainians away from Donetsk. Let's actually talk about the South Donetsk direction, because this is where a lot of the other battles are going on. One of the next towns to actually fall will probably be Novomykhailovka. So this week, the Russians control about a quarter of the town in the eastern outskirts of the village. The Russians are battling for the southern industrial zone right here. They took over the graveyard. However, the Ukrainians are putting fierce resistance in the center part of Novomykhailovka. And thus, this is if the center part falls, then it's open season for the rest of Novomykhailovka. So they're holding on for dear life in the center. However, one thing to note is that there's been reports of the Russians assaulting Ukrainian trenches in the northern part in this area right here. And so this looks like an area where the Russians are assaulting so that they could not only envelop Novomykhailovka from the north, but also, as we can see, they've already done it from the south. And thus, attacking from two directions I think they're trying to put the squeeze on the center part of Novomykhailovka right here. And thus, once Novomykhailovka falls, then the main, this is just a preventive, Ukrainians holding this on basically is just a preventive action from the Russians reaching the main piece of the pie, which is Konstantinovka. This village holds basically the gateway, is one of the main lock pit, strongholds that the Ukrainians use to cut off, to hold the Ugledar defense. And so not only does this help the Russians in pushing the Ukrainians away from Donetsk, in the South Donetsk direction, if they manage to take Konstantinivka, they'll be able to cut off the Ukrainian grouping in Ugledar. Not cut off completely, obviously, but this would if this falls, then this would greatly complicate Ukrainian defenses in Ugledar. And as we see, assaulting Ugledar directly is suicidal. However, so I think the Russians are going to most likely move along, do like island hop, like village hopping, and basically try to cut off Ugledar from the back here. However, and speaking of both these fronts, which is the village of Pobeba, however hell you say it, again, as the Russians advance along this road towards Karakova and try to encircle Krasnogorivka, their flanks will continuously be in a salient here. And so the Ukrainians are holding on to Pobeba to basically have a position to attack the Russians on the flanks as they advance towards Grigorivka. However, the Russians know they need to capture this village to not only do that, but also capturing this village will allow them to advance to the north of Konstantinivka and cut off Novomikhailivka as well. So this week, we also saw the Russian positions attack the front line of Pobeba, and I expect an assault directly on this village very soon. So we'll see how the Russians are able to take this village. So, the Russians are pushing all over the Donetsk front. This is the most active part of the front. Let's go on to, let's talk about this area right here. No changes in the Kherson front. In the Zaporozhye front, there has been some changes, actually. So at the end of this week, there were some reports that the Russians restarted their offensive operation in Zaporozhye. Now, we don't know the extent of this operation. We don't know what they're trying to do. However, there's been some gains. For example, they managed to capture the southern defenses of Robotyne. And capturing these southern trenches right here gives them the power or the ability to enter Robotyne from the south. Again, these are open fields, and this is, I think the goal is to reverse the Ukrainian gains in the summer. A lot of people are saying they're going to try to reach Orikov here. However, I don't know if the Russians have the power to do that, but we will see how much, the Russians are pushing here. Maybe this is just a distraction operation to put Ukrainian troops in Zaporozhye. But it would help the Russians to make this front more stable again, more flattened. So the Russians managed to reach the southern edge of Robotyne, and we'll see how much, this started at the end of this week, so we don't know much of the changes, but a lot of sources are saying there's been a large Russian push in Zaporozhye. So we'll see how much if that amounts to anything, or if this is just a distraction operation. But there were some gains in the south of Robotyne for the Russians. So we'll see if that offensive continues, and if it's just a wet fart. So we'll see. Let's talk about Bakhmut. That's another area that has a lot where the Russians are pushing. And so, as we mentioned last week, the Russians took over what they call the Popovsky Forest right here. And this week, basically, they've expanded out from their, how would you say it? They've managed to expand south of the Popovsky Forest and take more forest lines to the north of Ivanivska. And some sources are saying they have now reached the northern outskirts of Ivanivska right here. So the Russians you could see the, I don't think you could see directly here, but you could kind of see that there's some, the Ukrainians have some positions in the north of Ivanivska, and right now clashes are going on for the northern trenches of Ivanivska, because the Russians are not only in the eastern outskirts of Ivanivska, not in the village, but on the outskirts of it. Now they are reaching the northern part of it, and if they're able to consolidate in the north, there'll be a two-pronged attack on Ivanivska, and then the village will fall, and once this village falls and the Russians manage to reach the Seversky Donets Canal, what this would open for the Russians is basically they'll be able to cut off or severely threaten the Ukrainian positions on the other side of the Seversky Donets Canal. I'm talking in Klishchiivka and Andriivka. And I'm betting that as the Russians move south along this canal, the Ukrainians will just withdraw from Klishchiivka and Andriivka to the other side of the Seversky Donets Canal. So this area, capturing Ivanivska not only is the first step, will create a stepping stone to taking Chasiv Yar in the future, but will also allow them to cut off Ukrainians in the southern part of Bakhmut. Bogdanovka is still, the Russians are still trying to clear these trenches right here, this area right here, and this area right here. Because if these things fall, they'll basically be at the edge of Bogdanovka. However, they still need to take. One thing that's complicating the capture of Bogdanovka for the Russians is taking this forest right here, because they could take, while Russians are having progress in this area in the south, the Russians are not having, there hasn't been any progress in the north here. So they need to capture this forest in order to basically be able to take Bogdanovka and force the Ukrainians back to Kalinova and this area of the Sovietsky Donetsk Canal. So this week, the Russians basically expanded out south from the Popolsky Forest and reached the northern outskirts of Ivanivska. We'll see how they'll be able to continue developing their offensive towards Chasiv Yar, or if this is basically just trying to push to the Sovietsky Donetsk Canal, because Chasiv Yar is very hard to take. This is on the high ground. It's kind of expanded. There's a lot of forests that will be very hard to maneuver through. There's this mine up here, I believe. Like this is like some sort of forest mine or some shit. Chasiv Yar is very very hard to take. So we'll see how that develops. So maybe the Russians might just reach the Sovietsky Donetsk Canal and that's it. So we'll see how that develops, though. So Bakhmut is just one other area. In the Seversk front, nothing changed. Some sources are saying that they've reached the actual village of Bilogorivka. However, as I mentioned last time, Bilogorivka itself is not the issue. The issue is that the Ukrainians have positions in a higher elevation in this area, so that even the Russians take Bilogorivka, the Ukrainians will have the high ground advantage. So it's very hard for the Russians to actually consolidate control over this village. In the Liman front, the Russians are still pushing towards the Zhirbets River to try to make a good, stable defense position to expand upwards, and they could finally, with this maneuver, basically cut off, attack from two sides the Ukrainian grouping in the remaining of the Luhansk Oblast, specifically in Mikhaivka and Nevsky here. So we'll see. They're getting closer to the village of Terny. They made some more progress here. However, it's very, very slow progress. Again, this is over open fields, and with FPV drones, it's very hard to advance over open fields against a fortified enemy in Terny and Yampolovka. So we'll see how the Russians continue developing their offensive towards the Zhirbets River. But this is an area they are pushing in. No changes in the Kupiansk front this week. And no changes in the Kherson front. So yeah, I think that's basically what happened this week. A lot of changes on the Donetsk front. The main show was Avdiivka. We talked about how it fell, where the Russians will keep pushing, how this takes place in the grander spectrum of the Donetsk front, which is to push the Ukrainians away from, at least Ukrainian artillery away from Donetsk. And then I talked about some changes on the Bakhmut front as well, which is where the secondary Russian offensive is. So the Russians are also pushing in Liman area, in Kupiansk in a smaller scale, and then now it looks like they're also pushing in Zaporozhye. But we'll see how those offensives play out. So that's the end of this video. The Russian winter push continues. And, give this video a like, share this video around, comment your thoughts, and if you like videos like this, be sure to subscribe to my channel. So aim high and wander on.